Welcome to Highline BI 348 class video number 43. Hey, if you want to download this workbook, BI 348 Chapter 3, or the PowerPoint slides, click on the link below the video. Hey, we're in Chapter 3, Data Visualization for Tables and Charts. Our topics: data visualization. Then we'll talk about data visualization's golden rule. We're going to look at tables. We're going to look at a bunch of charts. We're going to briefly look at conditional formatting, graphical information system, and we'll remind ourselves about data dashboards. Now, data visualization, we basically have tables and charts. Now, tables are great for summarizing the data and seeing the exact numbers. Charts, on the other hand, give us that quick visual impression, great for seeing the trends and patterns. Now, both charts and tables will help us interpret, analyze, and learn from the data. One big difference between tables and charts: tables, that's when we want to make precise comparisons. But charts, we very rarely can make precise comparisons. What we want to do is make relative comparisons, right? The height of the columns. Here, it's looking at the exact numbers. Another important use for tables is when we have numbers that are in different units or magnitudes. You can imagine you have number of sales reps at a store and the revenues per day. This would be in a different unit and magnitude. So you might want to show that in a table instead of a chart. Data visualization, we actually will look at conditional formatting. Just one example, heat maps. Back in Chapter 2, we did a bunch with conditional formatting. We'll look at one example for graphical information systems. And actually, that's quite an amazing data analysis tool where we put statistics or data on maps. And then dashboards, we did that back in Chapter 2. Dashboards are important metrics presented visually and connected to updatable data sources. Remember, we did our Power Query and then clicked refresh and updated all of our source data, pulled it in, and all of our charts updated. Now, effective data visualization. It always allows you to take the raw data and see patterns and trends, analyze the data, learn from the data, and find errors. But really, the most important thing that effective data visualization does is it makes our analysis easier for others to see and understand. Effective, right? If we have a chart with a bunch of chart junk, then someone reading our chart is not going to understand the analysis we did. So we want to make sure that we learn how to effectively visualize our data. Now, visualization in terms of research. Research shows that humans can process visual images like charts faster than they can process rows of numbers. Now, we all know this from being alive and looking at numbers and charts. Charts, you get that quick visual impression. But research backs that up. Another thing that research backs up, and actually in recent years, data analysts have preferred columns and bar charts over pie charts. And the research shows that column and bars convey differences more easily than pie charts. Now, one of the great things about our textbook is that they have a whole section that says don't use pie charts and don't use 3D columns and all of the chart junk that Microsoft Excel offers up to you. Now, we got to talk about an amazing person when it comes to charting and graphing, Edward Tufte. He actually wrote this amazing book here and a bunch of other books all about taking numbers and visually portraying them to articulate your message. And he has two rules: data ink ratio rule and the no chart junk rule. Now, data ink ratio just means for any given amount of data, you don't want a lot of ink. And the no chart junk rule, we've been using that for years in classes at Highline and videos at YouTube. No chart junk. All elements in the chart should help deliver the message. Now, I'm going to boil all of this down on our next slide to data visualization's golden rule. And it is no extraneous elements in your table or chart. We don't need a bunch of extra lines and formatting in our table. We don't need a bunch of extra chart junk in our chart. Now, the interesting thing about this rule right here, and I have it down here as a side note, is one of the hallmarks of great art is that great art has zero or near zero extraneous elements. And if you think of that, art is all about visual. And that's the same thing for us. We're visualizing data or visualizing statistics or visualizing our analysis. So no extraneous elements. Implementing this rule means all elements in the chart or table should help deliver the message. No extraneous elements leads to more effective tables and charts. And when your table and charts are effective, then the benefit is that effective tables and charts allow you to better communicate your analysis to others. Now let's go to our next slide and talk about low data ink ratio. Now, what does data ink mean? If you take all the data that you have and you divide it by some number that represents ink, the less ink, the bigger this ratio will be. If there's too much ink, then it's a low ratio. The number is small. In this example right here, this is straight from the textbook that we're using. It's assumed that there's too many lines here, and we'll see an example on the next slide that cleans it up a bit. And this chart is just terrible. We don't need this legend. We don't need the lines. And oh my heavens, there's no labels here. And we have a little arrow here, contains chart junk. Next slide. That's much better. This has got a high data to ink ratio. That means there's less ink in the denominator. So when we do the division, the theoretical division, right, we're going to get a bigger number. That table's a little bit easier on the eyes. And look at this chart. It's got proper labels. We don't have that legend with that useless series. And we don't have all those horizontal lines. And if I do my little arrow, this does not contain chart junk. All right, next slide. We want to talk about the difference between when we use a table and a chart. Hey, tables are great when you want to see the exact number. We want to compare each number. Tables are perfect. Here's a chart. Here we're comparing the relative differences. Same data in both of these. Clearly, we could see the exact values. Here, we get a quick visual impression. Now, sometimes you want both, so certainly we're allowed to combine them. Here, we could see the relative comparison or differences between revenues and costs. Down here, if we want the exact numbers, boom, there they are. Hey, even in the charts, we have that green plus in our charts in Excel 2013 and later. You can just click that plus and tell the chart to plot the data table. It's pretty cool. Now, our next slide, just as an example of when we have different units. Usually, you want to use a table. You can see here we have headcount, cost, and revenues. The magnitude is quite different, and the units are different. Now, you could plot this on a chart and use a second axis and have different units and whatnot. But oftentimes, it's easier to show it in a table when the magnitudes or units are different. Now, I want to go 2 slides ahead to slide 16 and talk about table design principles. Now, of course, the data ink ratio should be high. And here's some rules straight from our textbook. I tend to totally agree with all these blue ones, and I don't necessarily agree with these two, although I may be outvoted by the majority of people who do data analysis and present data. But for tables, avoid using vertical lines up and down in the table unless they are necessary for clarity. I tend to think that more often than not, I need them for clarity. Horizontal lines are generally necessary only for separating column titles. That means our field names at the top from the data values, or when indicating that a calculation has taken place, like on an income statement when you have a line before you calculate total expenses or net income. Now, the rest of these are pretty awesome table design principles. In large tables, use some light shading to differentiate each one of the columns, and we'll see an example of that in just a second. Numbers should be right aligned. Text should be left aligned. Now, actually, I follow this one pretty faithfully. If we go back to slide number 11, and I'm going to hit 11 and jump back here. Oh, wait a second. Those numbers are centered. I tend to not do this, but you see a lot of examples out there in the working world on the planet Earth where people center everything. Now, it's OK for the final report, but don't do it when you have your data in the sheet and your analysis, because as we talked about earlier in the class, when you start centering things, you lose your visual cue about whether Excel thinks it's text or a number. Back to slide 16. Now, here's another great table design principle. All numbers should have the same number of digits. I can't believe how many times I've seen tables where this rule isn't followed, and it's so simple and really adds clarity to the table. Units must be indicated either by number formatting or labels. So at the top of the column, you might have a $sign to indicate it's in dollars, or a percent symbol rather than cluttering the table. So however you do it, whether it's with labels or number formatting, you got to show the unit. And large numbers may be rounded to the dollar, the thousands, the millions, even the billions, like in GDP numbers. All right, our next slide has a great example. There it is. This is straight from our textbook. A, B, C, or D. Which one do you prefer? The author states that most people prefer D. Now, I don't know what it is, but I prefer this one here. Now, there's no doubt that example we just saw back on slide number 11. I don't know, that one looks OK, and there's not a lot of lines. But this one on 17, I certainly don't like that there. But I guess I'm outvoted here. So you get to use your eyeballs, and certainly when you're in your job, you listen to what the bosses are saying. And our last slide before we go over to Excel, this is a great example. When you have a lot of columns, differentiate every other column with a different shade. Now notice here they've centered it again also. That's something I do not do, but it seems like lots of people like to do that. Now let's go over to Excel. And here's a table we were given. Sales rep, sales in 2015. 16, percentage change, customer accounts, and years with company. What do we got to do? First, I got to show you a great feature I use all the time. I want to wipe away all formatting, number formatting, style formatting, home ribbon, editing. This is one of the more important things. Clear format. Now, I use the top two regularly, clear all. If you use this, you can delete everything and clear the formatting. How many times have you hit the delete key, but the formatting is still there? Clear all does it. I'll even hit that. Control Z. But if you don't want to clear it all, you want to clear just the formats, boom. Now, I know the keyboard. I use this so often. In 2007 or later, I don't even know what it is. It's Alt, and I'm going to follow the keys. H, and then E, and then F. So half, H-A-F. I remember it from earlier versions, Alt, E-A-F. And now we can start over. Now, I'm actually going to try and do it. I'm going to do it two ways. I'm going to do it my way, and I always have the field names with some dark color like this. And then, of course, I have black borders everywhere. Now, this says it's in $signs, so that's pretty convenient. I'm going to highlight these numbers. Control-1 to do number formatting. And all we're going to need, not currency, I'm going to say number with a comma separator. And these values here, for these big numbers, we probably don't need to see any decimals. So I'm going to put it down to 0 like that. Okay, that looks much better. Now, these percentages, we have a problem here. In Excel, if you go up and use percentage number formatting, the percent symbol will show up in every cell. And I actually don't know a way with number formatting to get this to look like an integer, right? So you actually have to do this little trick. And I usually teach to not do this. And the reason why is times 100. Well, that'll give us the right number that we can show up here. But the problem is if you ever use that in any calculations, then it's the incorrect number. But we're talking about final tables presenting them. So I'm going to copy this down. And so there they are. Now, how do I get them back up into the table? I'm going to copy them, and then I'm going to come up here and right-click, and right there, paste special values. Another way to do it is once they're copied is to remember that there's this paste drop-down up in the home ribbon. You can come up here and get the values, or here's another great trick. If you already used your mouse to get it, you might as well right-click the edge. You see, that's the move cursor. I'm going to right-click and drag up. And when I let go of the right-click, a secret menu pops up, and I say copy here as values. So then I can delete these down here. So now I have what I want. Well, almost. The decimals, there's only one, there's two. I want to have all numbers with the same number of decimals. Control 1, number, and use a separator. Click OK. And then these numbers are fine. All right, that's one way to do it. Let's look at another way. And I actually am going to have to admit that this other way is going to look a little bit better. I'm going to come down here. I copied. I'm going to click down here and Control V. Now I want to keep all of the number formatting, but I am going to remove the borders. So I come up here and no borders. Now I'm going to highlight the whole table with exactly one row and column next to it. And I'm going to come up and use white fill. Boom, like that. Now, I had white headers up here, so I better come up here and do font color black. I'm going to use Control B to highlight the headers, and I'm going to do this bottom border, so right here at the top. And that's looking pretty clean. We could copy and paste. We could also change these column widths up here. Now, if you don't like that white, you can come up and use a nice light blue. And look at that. That seems easier to read than this one up here. I still tend to, when I'm analyzing the numbers, I like the black lines. All right, that's our first example. Let's go over to this next sheet. Table Design Principles 2. Oh, that is terrible. Look at that. This violates every single rule. It's got bold, too many lines. The lines, the actual borders are bold. The font color and the fill color don't have a great enough value difference. If you print this out, it'll look terrible. So we're going to highlight everything, and we love our eraser for formatting, our Alt-EAF. We start over. Now, these numbers, we're going to highlight these numbers. And we're going to start off Control 1, come over to number. I do not need to show decimals here. I'm going to use a comma and just look at these and see what's happening. Now notice it says millions up here. So we got to learn a great custom formatting trick. Control 1. And now whatever you select from here, when you come down to custom, you can see the custom number formatting. Now in our prereq class, Business 218, we learned about custom number formatting. I also gave you some notes earlier in this class in one of the workbooks. But the pound sign means show significant digits. The 0 means show insignificant and significant digits. But what we want to notice here is that that comma, pound sign, comma, pound, 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 or pound, pound, 0 will show the comma separator. Now watch this. I'm going to come to the end here, and I'm going to remove the 0 and just use the pound custom number formatting. But watch what happens. When I type a comma at the end here, watch what happens up here. Comma. Whoa, it divides by 1,000. Comma. Divides by 1,000. So 2 commas. That just got rid of 6 zeros. So this is in millions. Now notice our labels at the top have an M, so we do not need an M here. Plus, it would clutter up all of the numbers, right? But if you needed to put an M, for example, in charts, sometimes on your horizontal axis, you want to show in the millions, but you need an M, you can, in double quotes, and actually double quotes, you can type whatever you want. I'm going to type a space, a big M, and N double quotes. Anything within double quotes appears on the surface of the spreadsheet as number formatting, not actually in the cell. Now I'm going to backspace, backspace. That's the one we're going to use. Click OK. Those numbers look much better. Now I want to highlight the first row with our field names. Control B to add bold. Now I want to come up to the font group and click my border button for underline. And there we go. Now I want to highlight all of these numbers and add fill white. And then I want to come to the second column, and we want to do our every other column a different color. So I'm going to use a light blue. Now with that second column highlighted, right-click on the mini toolbar. There's our Format Painter for copying format only. I click it once. Oh, but I don't want to click it once. I'm going to unclick it to turn it off. I'm going to double-click it. That loads up this paintbrush so I can click, and be sure not to click down here or up here. You got to be very exact where you click. And I'm clicking every other column. Once I'm done, I click Escape. And that looks much better. Our table of exact numbers is much easier to read. Now we want to go over and talk about charts on the sheet, Chart 1. Now on the chart sheet, here's our data source. There's a pivot table. But before we start making charts, let's jump over to PowerPoint. We're going to talk about column and bar charts, stack column and bar, clustered column and bar, line charts, XY scatters, bubble charts, and then there's a couple other topics. Now, in the prereq classes, we did a lot, especially in statistic and business 216. We talked about all these different charts. But I want to go over and briefly go through each one of those. But before we see an example of each one of those, next slide, what do charts do? Well, we already know. They visually portray quantitative data, number data. Give a quick impression of the numbers so we can see trends and patterns. Effective charts, we know our rule is no chart junk. Every single time we make a chart, we look at every element and ask, is this helping to deliver our message? If the answer is no, we hit the delete key. Next slide. Most charts come from summarized tables. This is a cross-tabulated table. We simply summarize, and then we make a chart. Now, not all the time. Sometimes you take all the data and you plot it like an XY scatter or something like that. But most of the time, we're doing some sort of summarization. You can think back to our frequency distributions for continuous quantitative data, where we were actually counting between an upper and lower limit for classes. That was a lot of data, and we summarized it, counting between the upper and lower, and then made our column chart histograms. Hey, next slide, we've got to talk about Excel chart terminology. Here's the numbers in a column charts. The numbers are always called series. The categories, whether on the horizontal axis or in the legend, those are called categories. Here's the horizontal axis. Those are categories. Here's the legend. Those are categories. Column heights in a column chart convey the number. The tallest one is the biggest number. And then there's a chart title. When we open up our Select Data dialog box to choose any range we want, series is always going to be, hey, those are the numbers. And the category is going to be the items listed along the horizontal axis. Now we have a few slides coming up for column and bar, stack column or bar, clustered column or bar. Those we'll come back to if we need them, but there are, in essence, the definitions of each one of those charts. So let's just go ahead and make some charts and talk about them. Now, the first one is just going to be a simple column chart. Here's sales channel. Here's the numbers. I click in a single cell. That's a pivot table. Insert. And we go up to charts, and I'm going to click the drop down for column. 3D, that's chart junk. Don't use it. We're simply going to use two-dimensional. Now, here's the elements in our chart. We ask our question. Hey, is this chart junk? Well, for us, we're not going to change it or filter it, so it is. I'm going to right-click, hide all field buttons on chart. We talked about the delete button earlier, but this is the one thing in a pivot chart where you have to say hide all field buttons. Now we can ask the question, do we need this legend? No way, that's chart junk, so I hit delete. Do we need this title? Well, not the way it currently sits. I'm going to simply notice that it's a solid line and just start typing. I'm going to type revenue by sales channel. You can see up in the formula bar and enter. Do I need the horizontal lines? Hey, and that's an important thing. Notice I tried to click the horizontal line, but it's selecting the whole chart. You got to be sure and click inside and see those little translucent circles. If you don't like them, you can hit delete. I'm going to leave them this time, Control-Z. We actually did a lot with columns earlier in the class. We added the numbers to the top, deleted this. We did all sorts of amazing things. But the rest of it, we need the columns. This is perfect. I don't need a label down here because I have the word sales channel up here, and the numbers are fine. Hey, that's a column chart. Now I want to make from this chart a bar chart and compare and contrast. I'm going to click on the edge, Control-C to copy, come over to the side, Control-V. Now I'm going to close Pivot Table Fields and right-click this and point to Change Chart Type, or you can come up to Design and Change Chart Type. And I simply want to change it over on the left to bar. And all it does is it puts it on its side. This is a bar. This is a column. Now, out there in the working world and in lots of books, they call these bar charts interchangeably. But in Excel, this is a column. This is a bar. Now, what do both of these charts do? They simply show you differences across categories. That's what column and bar charts do. Now, what's the difference between the bar and the column? Well, sometimes the bar chart will emphasize the differences more forcefully than a column chart. Also, if you have really long labels for your categories, then the bar chart will list them horizontally without wrapping them. So it's kind of nice to have a label all on one line, whereas with a column, sometimes they'll wrap it and it won't look neat. All right, so bar and column. Now we want to talk about clustered column and stacked column or bar. Now let's scroll down, and I have a second pivot table, cross-tabulated. The row headers are months. The column headers are sales channel. The intersection is a calculation made with two conditions or criteria. So it's adding the sales that are in-store sales and in June. Now, we click in a single cell just like we did in the chart just a moment ago, Insert Charts, and we do our same 2D. And look at that. Right out of the box, it's virtually perfect. Now we can ask our question of all of the elements. Do we need them? We're not going to filter this, so I'm going to come over here and right-click, hide all field buttons on chart. I'm going to click on this and Control-1, and I'm going to put it either at the top or the bottom. I'm going to try the top. And I would like to add a chart title, so I click the green plus chart title. It's got a solid line, so I simply start typing. 2014 sales and enter. Now, depending on the use of this is pretty obvious here. I don't think we need to put a label down here. Also, this is probably pretty obvious. Hey, look, our chart is done. Now, if you don't like these items in the legend and you like to switch the horizontal category and the legend, you simply come up to Design and switch row or column. You got to be kidding me. Look at that. Now, this chart is called a clustered column. All the columns are clustered for in-stores, mail order, website. Now, I'd like to copy this and paste it off to the side. I'm going to close this, Control-V, and I want to change the chart type. Right-click, change chart type, or come up to Design, change chart type. And we want to change it to the second one. Notice column is always clustered column, but we want to come here and do stacked column. And when I click OK, slightly different emphasis. Both the same data, but with different emphasis. Now, this one we're clearly able to see within this sales channel the comparison for the different columns. So the emphasis is on comparing each one of the month sales for each one of the sales channels. Over here, the emphasis is on the horizontal axis here and the height. We're still allowed to compare the different categories, the different months, in each sales category, but the emphasis here is on the height. I can clearly see that website sales are the highest. Stacked column, clustered column. And both of these are awesome charts virtually out of the box with one click for cross-tabulated pivot tables. Now we want to come over to the sheet Charts 2 and talk about some other chart types. A line chart. Line charts are great for showing changes over a category, most of the time a time category. So we have sales and quarters. I'm simply going to highlight. And notice we always have our field names at the top, even on a data set we're going to put into a chart, because these names will actually show up inside the chart. This word sales will be the name of this series of numbers. So I'm going to highlight, insert, over to line. And a line, and I'm going to select this one with markers. And a line simply shows the changes in the number up and down with the line over our categories. A single number here listed on the vertical axis and our categories along the horizontal. Now I'd like to actually start this maybe at like 500,000. So I'm going to click on the axis, Control 1, and there's the min. Actually, I'm going to start it at 400,000. And then Enter. I think I want to also change the number formatting. I do not need those decimals at all, so I'm going to say decimal places 0 and tab. Now, one trick we learned in our table example earlier in the video is this is 700,000, 650,000. What if we wanted to hack off these zeros and have a K? So it's a 650K. Well, we can do that with number formatting. In our earlier example for tables, we saw how to put in double quotes like M for million. But watch this. It's even easier for 1,000. I'm going to highlight this format code, and I'm going to do a $0 and then a comma and then a K. The K is a special character in number formatting that will show up without the double quote. So when I click Add, just like that, I get my 800K, 750K, etc. Now maybe I want to add a space here. I'm going to add a space and then click Add. That's looking much better. Now, one number and a category when you have when you're using a line chart. I'm going to drag this off to the side. Here we have two numbers. We're certainly allowed to have two numbers. It'll just plot two lines. And again, all of these labels at the top are important, and we'll see why in just a second. I'm going to go up to Insert. There's our line. Select the second one and click. Now I'm going to leave that there. Or no, I'm going to click here, Control 1, put it at the top, and then I'm going to delete this. I think it's self-evident what these are, revenue and expenses. We might have some title about what type of revenue, like the date period, but we're going to leave it like that. You know, if you don't want to see the horizontal lines, you click on them and delete. I'm going to leave them. Now, I would like to go look at the series of numbers. So you can right-click, Select Data, or up in the design, you can click Select Data. And there it is. Very important to name your column headers or field names. So when you come here and try to add, edit, remove, you can see exactly what it is. Now notice, here's the horizontal axis. It says horizontal category. Over here it says series. Those are the numbers. Click OK. All right, so a line chart, one number over some category. Now, XY scatter is different because there's two numbers. We have an X and a Y. X should come first. That way the charting engine will interpret it. Y comes second. Anytime you want to see a relationship between two variables like this, X and Y, we can use the XY scatter. Insert, chart, and there it is. And dots are for sample data. When you have a model like our fixed cost, variable cost model we built earlier in the class, then we use XY scatter with a line. But here we definitely want the markers. And there it is. Oh, what is wrong with this? This is not a good chart. And the main reason is we have no idea what these numbers are. I'm going to come right up to the green plus and say Axis Titles. Now I'm going to scoot this out of the way a little bit, close this. And now with this selected, I can type an equal sign to shoot up here. Test score, that's the Y. The Y is right there, and then Enter. I click on the X-axis title. equal sign shoots me up there, and I get hours studied. And now I need to change this, and I'm just going to type, is there a relationship, and enter. Now that's a good looking chart. Whether or not you want the grid lines, you can decide that. Simply click and delete. But is there a relationship? We see hours is the X, test score is the Y. So it looks like there could be a line right through here. Next chapter, we'll see how to create that line in a model based on XY scatter. But notice it looks like as hours studied increases, the test scores also increase, a direct relationship. That's an XY scatter chart to represent visually our XY data. Now we have another chart we want to look at, the bubble chart. Now the bubble chart can take 1, 2, 3 variables, and this last variable will actually plot x, y, and then the last variable will be a circle. The bigger the number, the bigger the bubble will be, or the circle. I'm going to highlight field names at the top, x, y, and then our size of our marker. Go up to Insert, under XY, and there it is. Chart junk. There it is. We're going to select that one. I'm going to click on the chart title and type investment projects and enter. Come up to the green plus. I definitely want axis titles. Equal sign. That's going to be our risk estimate from 1 to 10. Down here on the X, equal sign, and I click on expected rate of return and enter. And now we come to the green plus, and I'm going to go to data labels and then click the little arrow and more options. And over here, I want to say bubble size and uncheck Y. And so now we have the actual amount invested for each one of these projects. Actually, let's click on the labels for our amount invested and come over to our series icon, label options. Scroll down. I'm going to try and center. And then click off to the side. That's looking OK. That might not always work depending on where the circles are. Now, we do not have a label for that. So I'm simply going to go up to Insert. And right here on Shape, click the drop down and get like a rectangle or something. And maybe right here, click and drag. I'm going to go up to the formula bar, equal sign, and amount invested in millions. Click and drag. Maybe I'm going to bring that down here. And so there we have a bubble chart, in essence, to represent 1, 2, and 3 different variables. Now let's scroll over, and we want to talk about a heat map. Clicking on the sheet heat, we have some sales reps and their sales for each one of the months. And what we'd like to do is use a heat map, and it is amazingly easy in Excel. It's not called a heat map, but we go up to Home, Styles, Conditional Formatting, Color Scales, and it will divide into 3 essential colors. I'm going to click this one right here. The green is going to be the biggest. All the way to the red is the smallest. Now we can see the red values. The closer it is to that red, the smaller it is. The orange ones are starting to get bigger. The middle values are the yellow ones. And then the biggest ones are the green ones. 783 is the biggest number. So it's a way of visualizing the data from biggest to smallest. Now the last topic, Graphical Information System. Now we're on the sheet GIS, and we want to look at a simple example of Graphical Information System. And all that means is, hey, we have some data that we want to plot on a map. Now in the textbook, they just briefly talk about it. There's no homework. And there's not going to be any requirement for you to do this because I'm using 2016. And I know most of you don't have Excel 2016, but we got to check this out. Zip code, population. We'd like to plot this on a map. So Insert. And over in 2016 under Tours, there's 3D Maps. So I click. And just like that, look at that map. Here's our ribbon tab. Here's our pane where we can drag and drop. Here's our field list right here. But check this out. Under location, it's already got zip code. You can see something already going on there. And under height, I'm going to click the plus and add population. And look at that instantly because it says column up here. This is actually stack column. There it is. We can zoom in on our map. Look at that. That is simply amazing. A couple of clicks and we have plotted something right on our map. We can turn it to the side. Now we can come over and select. This is clustered columns. There's no difference here because we only have one series there. There's a bubble, which is not going to work for us. There is the heat map. And if we adjust this looking from the top, we can see the scale here. That is simply beautiful. Look, the darker, the smaller the area. As it gets towards the dark orange here, we have larger population. And finally, we can actually color in each one of the zip codes. Look at that. That is amazing. Here's our scale for color. And there's a lot more to this. You can plot actually a time variable and actually build. You can click play, and it will play how the variable changes over time. All right, so that's an example of graphical information system. I'm going to go back over to our Excel sheet. That's the last topic in this chapter. Chapter 3, right? It's all review for us. All the data visualization we have done in all the prereq classes and in this class so far. But we did go over tables and charts and some of the important ways to make effective tables. And for charting, we learned the different chart types and when to use them. Hey, that's our last video for Chapter 3. It's our only video, video 43. Next chapter is Chapter 4. We'll get to do linear regression. All right, we'll see you next video.